What if the thing breaking your heart is not distance, not bad timing, not even attachment wounds, but the brutal fact that someone has learned how to keep you emotionally available without ever truly being there for you? Because that is where this starts. Not with a villain, not with some cold, obvious user who wears their selfishness on their face. It starts with confusion. It starts with chemistry. It starts with moments that feel real. Deep talks, intense eye contact, vulnerable confessions, pulling you close just enough to make you believe there is something rare here. And then just when your nervous system begins to settle, just when your hope starts building, they shift, they go quiet, they pull back, they become hard to read. And suddenly you are no longer in a relationship. You are in a psychological maze. That is why this hurts so much. Because when an avoidant is using you, it rarely feels like use in the beginning. It feels like complexity. It feels like pain. It feels like maybe this person wants love but is terrified of it. Maybe if I am patient enough, safe enough, understanding enough, they will stop running. Maybe I am not being used at all. Maybe I am just loving someone through their fears. And that thought right there has trapped more poor people than almost anything else in modern relationships. You do not get stuck because you are weak. You get stuck because the pattern is powerful. Avoidant people often do not connect in a clean, direct way. They connect in flashes. They let you feel close, then they retreat. They give signals, then they deny the meaning of those signals. They want comfort, but fear closeness. They want intimacy, but resist being emotionally responsible for what intimacy creates. So if you already have a big heart, if you already tend to explain people instead of confronting reality, if you are drawn to depth and woundedness and emotional mystery, this kind of dynamic can hook you hard. And here is the part most people do not want to admit. Sometimes what you call attachment chemistry is actually emotional starvation. Sometimes what feels intense is just inconsistency. Sometimes what feels special is just unpredictability. And the more unpredictable someone is, the more your mind starts chasing meaning. You analyze texts, you replay conversations, you study tone, you search for clues. You tell yourself there must be something deeper here because why else would it affect you so much? But intensity is not always depth. Sometimes intensity is just your nervous system reacting to uncertainty. That is why this conversation matters. Because there is a difference between someone who struggles with closeness and someone who benefits from keeping you in emotional limbo. There is a difference between someone who is healing and someone who has simply learned how to receive love without offering safety in return. And if you do not understand that difference, you can spend months, even years, calling your pain compassion, calling your confusion patience, and calling your self-abandonment loyalty. Think about what this does to a person. You start the connection wanting love, but somewhere along the way you become a detective, a therapist, a fixer, a waiting room. You stop asking, does this relationship nourish me? And you start asking, what do I need to do? So they stop pulling away. There's the shift that changes everything. Because once your emotional energy starts revolving around their distance, their silence, their fear, their mood, their availability, your center of gravity is gone. You are no longer standing in your truth. You are standing inside their instability. And the scary part is, many avoidant people do not even plan this consciously. That is what makes it so confusing. A dismissive avoidant may crave connection in private, then feel trapped the second emotional expectations rise. A fearful avoidant may come in with intense warmth, deep need, even strong affection, then panic when the bond starts feeling real. They can genuinely miss you and still mistreat you. They can feel attached to you and still use your presence for regulation without building anything secure. That is why your empathy becomes dangerous in the wrong dynamic. Because you see the wound and the wound becomes the excuse. But your heart does not care whether the harm was deliberate or subconscious. Your nervous system does not heal faster because the person hurting you had trauma. Your self-worth does not stay intact just because they did not mean to be selfish. Impact still matters. And when somebody keeps taking comfort, attention, loyalty, emotional access, physical closeness, or reassurance from you, while refusing the consistency, honesty, and vulnerability that healthy love requires, something real is happening. Something painful. Something people often avoid naming, because naming it would force them to face the truth. And the truth is this: A person can be wounded and still use you. A person can fear intimacy and still exploit your emotional availability. A person can have attachment trauma and still benefit from keeping you close enough to soothe them, but far enough away that they never have to fully show up. That is the pattern we are exposing here. Not to make you bitter, not to make you cynical, but to wake you up before you hand more of your life to someone who only knows how to love in half measures. Because the hardest sign is not always the silence. It is not always the disappearing act. It is not even the mixed signals. The hardest sign is the one you defend, because part of you wants the story to still work. Part of you wants all this effort to mean something. Part of you wants the pain to turn into proof that the connection is special. But pain is not proof. Longing is not proof. Emotional addiction is not proof. And when you finally see that, you stop chasing answers from the person hurting you and start getting honest with yourself. That honesty is where your power begins. Not when they change. Not when they finally explain themselves. Not when they come back with the perfect words. Your power begins when you stop asking whether their behavior can be understood and start asking whether it should be tolerated. That question changes the whole game. Because if someone only feels close to you when they need something, if they only open the door when they are lonely, overwhelmed, afraid, or losing access to you, then what you are experiencing may not be love growing slowly. It may be a pattern that feeds on your hope. And once you see that clearly, you can never unsee it. What does it really mean when someone only reaches for you in the exact moments they need relief, but disappears the second you need something real from them? That is the first sign. And it cuts deep because on the surface, it does not look cruel. It looks emotional. It looks vulnerable. It looks like they trust you. They come back after days of silence. They call when life feels heavy. They text when they are overwhelmed. They lean on you when they are lonely, confused, rejected, stressed, or emotionally unsteady. And in those moments, the connection feels strong again. You feel chosen again. You feel seen again. But pay attention. The pattern is not built around mutual closeness. It is built around their need. That is how this dynamic keeps people trapped. The avoidant does not stay gone forever. If they did, it would be easier to leave. What keeps you emotionally tied is that they return at just the right time. They come in with warmth when you are starting to detach. They soften when you are exhausted. They give you just enough sincerity to restart your hope. And because your brain has been starving for consistency, that small opening feels huge. You take their moment of need and interpret it as emotional depth. You think, finally, this is real. Finally, they are letting me in. But being needed is not the same thing as being loved well. This is where attachment psychology becomes brutally important. Many avoidant people struggle to regulate emotional distress in relationships. When they feel overwhelmed, they often deactivate. They shut down. They numb out. They create space. But when the distance becomes too great, or when life hits them hard enough, they may reach for a familiar source of comfort. That familiar source is often the person they know will respond, the person they know will care, the person they know will listen, soothe, reassure, and make things feel safer for a while. If that person is you, then your emotional availability becomes a resource. And that resource can be used without the relationship ever becoming secure. Read that again in your own heart. You can be deeply valuable to someone and still not be deeply protected by them. You can matter to their nervous system, to their loneliness, to their need for reassurance, and still not matter enough to their actions for them to build something stable. That is one of the most painful realities in avoidant dynamics. They do not always come back because they are ready. Sometimes they come back because they are dysregulated. Sometimes they miss the comfort, not the commitment. Sometimes they crave access to your energy more than they crave the responsibility of loving you properly. Look at how this feels in real life. They vanish when things are calm. They pull away when emotional closeness starts requiring consistency. But the second they are stressed, rejected by someone else, uncertain about their life, or afraid you are moving on, suddenly you hear from them. Suddenly they can talk for hours. Suddenly they are more affectionate. Suddenly they sound reflective, open, almost transformed. And because you have wanted this version of them so badly, you open your heart again. You tell yourself this time is different, but then their nervous system stabilizes, their crisis passes, their loneliness fades, and the connection cools again. That is not emotional intimacy. That is emotional consumption. And the reason it is so dangerous is because it trains you to confuse access with progress. Every time they come back, your hope resets. Every time they soften, your standards drop. Every time they need you, you feel important. But importance in moments of distress does not equal priority in everyday life. A healthy bond does not only activate when one person is falling apart. A healthy bond has presence, it has steadiness, it has emotional reciprocity. It does not disappear every time the relationship asks for maturity. This pattern also creates something powerful inside your body: intermittent reinforcement. One of the strongest bonding mechanisms there is. When affection is inconsistent, your system does not relax. It chases, it scans, it waits. It becomes hyper-focused on the reward because the reward is unpredictable. That is why people can become obsessed with someone who has given them so little. It is not because crumbs are satisfying. It is because the unpredictability makes the crumbs feel psychologically loaded. Your mind starts attaching huge meaning to tiny moments because tiny moments are all it gets. And if you already have anxious tendencies, or if you grew up having to earn closeness, this can feel eerily familiar. You become the emotional first responder, the reliable one, the safe landing place, the person they can call when the world feels too heavy. But when your heart needs the same level of presence, when you need honesty, consistency, reassurance, or emotional labor from them, they are tired, distant, confused, overwhelmed, or suddenly allergic to pressure. That is when the truth starts coming into focus. The relationship is not balanced around mutual care. It is organized around their comfort. Now here is where many people talk themselves out of clarity. They say, but they do care about me. But they do come back. But they do tell me things they tell no one else. But they do seem genuine when they are vulnerable. And all of that may be true. The issue is not whether their feelings exist. The issue is whether their feelings lead to behavior that is safe for your heart. Because someone can feel deeply and still relate selfishly. Someone can cry in your arms and still disappear when your emotional needs become inconvenient. Someone can mean every word in their moments of closeness and still leave you holding the emotional bill afterward. That is why you have to stop measuring this dynamic only by intensity. Measure it by pattern. Who initiates when life is hard? Who disappears when closeness requires steadiness? Who gets comfort? Who pays in emotional confusion? Who receives the benefits of connection while avoiding the obligations of connection? That is where the answer lives. And if this sign is present, the pain usually goes deeper than disappointment. It touches your worth. Because nothing is more destabilizing than feeling deeply important in private moments and strangely disposable in real life. That contradiction can make you work harder, love harder, explain harder, wait longer. But the harder you work to keep what only appears in moments of their need, the more you train yourself to survive on emotional leftovers. You were not meant to be someone's emergency exit, someone's loneliness cure, someone's temporary nervous system regulator while they keep their deeper life closed to you. You were meant to experience connection that does not depend on crisis to become tender. And the moment you understand that, the whole dynamic starts losing its magic. Why would someone let you feel close, reveal pieces of their pain, speak to your soul in certain moments, and still never truly let you into their real emotional world? Because that is the second sign. They keep you emotionally invested without ever fully letting you in. And this one is brutal because it does not feel like distance at first. It feels like depth. It feels like rare access. It feels like you are touching the hidden part of them that no one else gets to see. They may tell you about childhood wounds. They may confess fears they usually hide. They may speak in intimate ways late at night, in quiet moments, in those emotionally charged windows where their defenses are lower. And every one of those moments can make you believe the bond is becoming more real. But a person can open emotionally in fragments and still remain unavailable relationally. That is the trap. Emotional access is not the same as emotional availability. A person can tell you what hurt them, what shaped them, what made them afraid of closeness, even what they feel for you, and still not build the behaviors that create actual safety. They can share pain without sharing responsibility. They can reveal vulnerability without practicing consistency. They can let you witness their inner world and still keep you locked out of the part that matters most, the part where choices are made. This is especially common in avoidant dynamics because selective vulnerability feels safer than full relational surrender. A dismissive avoidant may disclose something personal, even moving, but do it on their terms, in controlled doses, without allowing the disclosure to change the structure of the relationship. A fearful avoidant may be even more confusing because their emotional intensity can be much stronger. They may feel a lot, they may say a lot, they may even seem deeply attached. But when intimacy starts requiring a stable form, they panic. The closer it gets, the more the internal alarm goes off. So you end up in this strange emotional half-world. You know things about them that feel sacred. You have heard confessions that sound like trust. You have shared moments that feel bigger than casual connection. But the relationship itself remains undefined, unstable, or strangely fragile. The future stays vague. The effort stays inconsistent. The emotional door opens, but only halfway. Enough to keep you leaning in. Never enough to let you rest. That is what makes this sign so psychologically addictive. Human beings naturally look for meaning. If someone reveals pain to you, your heart wants to believe it means something. If someone says they have never talked to anyone like this before, your attachment system takes that as significance. If someone acts deeply bonded in private, you start building an emotional narrative around that intimacy. You begin investing not only in who they are now, but in what they could become if they stop being afraid. And that is where people lose years, because potential is seductive. Potential gives pain a purpose. Potential tells you to wait. Potential tells you the inconsistency is temporary. Potential whispers you are closer than you think. But relationships are not built on flashes of potential. They are built on repeated, embodied emotional responsibility. They are built on what a person can sustain, not what they can express during rare moments of openness. Think about the emotional toll of being kept in that in-between space. You cannot fully grieve because nothing has clearly ended. You cannot fully relax because nothing is truly secure. You cannot fully trust because their actions keep contradicting their softer moments. So you stay emotionally suspended, hopeful, hurt, confused, connected, and lonely all at the same time. That kind of limbo slowly erodes your clarity because the bond never becomes solid enough to hold, yet never disappears enough to release. And let's be honest, this is often where self-betrayal begins wearing the mask of compassion. You tell yourself they are trying. You tell yourself their inconsistency is not personal. You tell yourself the private tenderness must count for something. And yes, it counts in one sense. It tells you they are capable of emotional experience. But capability is not the same as willingness. Feeling is not the same as follow-through. A person can have real emotion and still lack the courage, regulation, and accountability required to transform that emotion into secure behavior. That is why this sign hurts differently. It is not raw rejection. Rejection at least gives you something clear to fight against. This is something softer and more corrosive. It is prolonged emotional suggestion. It is being invited into the atmosphere of intimacy without being given the structure of it. It is being made to feel deeply significant while remaining chronically uncertain about your actual place in their life. And uncertainty is expensive. It drains attention. It steals peace. It turns your mind into a constant interpreter. You start reading between the lines because the lines themselves never become stable. You start accepting ambiguity as a love language. You start feeling grateful for tiny moments of closeness that would feel painfully insufficient in any healthy relationship. This is how people become over-invested in people who are under-committed. Not because they are foolish, because emotional breadcrumbs, when mixed with real chemistry and unresolved wounds, can feel like destiny. But destiny does not ask you to abandon your own reality. Real connection does not require you to live on interpretation. Real intimacy does not bloom only in secret emotional windows and then disappear when it is time to stand in the light of day. If someone wants the emotional intensity of closeness but resists the grounded behavior that closeness requires, then what they are giving you is not full-hearted love. It is partial access. And partial access can keep a person starving for a very long time. So ask yourself something harder than, do they feel something for me? Ask, does their way of relating allow me to feel safe, chosen, and emotionally held in a consistent way? Because if the answer is no, then the deepest private moments may not be signs of progress at all. They may be the very thing keeping you invested in a bond that never becomes whole. What if the real problem is not that they do not want connection, but that they want all the benefits of connection without carrying the weight that real connection demands? That is the third sign. They want what feels good about closeness, but not what costs them control. They want your warmth, your patience, your body, your loyalty, your emotional support, your understanding, your softness, your reassurance, your listening ear, your availability. They want to know you are there. They want to feel chosen by you. They want the comfort of your presence. But when the relationship starts asking for structure, definition, accountability, steadiness, or emotional labor, they pull back like the whole thing suddenly became too much. This is where the fog starts to clear. Because now you are not just dealing with an emotionally distant person. You are dealing with selective participation. They show up for what soothes them. They disappear from what stretches them. They stay for the rewards. They resist the responsibilities. And if you are not careful, you will end up performing the role of partner without ever receiving the treatment of one. That is a devastating place to live, because it makes you overfunction. You start filling in the missing pieces. You become more understanding, more flexible, more low maintenance, more patient, more careful with your needs, more afraid to ask for clarity, because you know clarity might trigger distance. And little by little, you stop asking for a real relationship and start negotiating for access. You start bargaining with your own standards. You tell yourself labels do not matter, consistency takes time, emotional responsibility cannot be rushed. But deep down, your body knows the truth. It knows when you are being asked to give relationship-level energy to someone offering convenience-level commitment. Avoidant attachment plays a huge role here. Commitment is not just a romantic word to many avoidant people. It can feel like pressure. It can feel like engulfment. It can feel like losing autonomy, losing space, losing emotional control. A dismissive avoidant often protects independence so fiercely that any sign of relational expectation can activate withdrawal. A fearful avoidant may crave commitment and fear it at the exact same time, creating cycles of intense closeness followed by panic and distancing. So yes, the fear is real. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Their fear does not make the impact on you less real. If someone continually receives the emotional, physical, or practical benefits of your presence while refusing to build mutual security, then your compassion is being turned into a resource. And that resource has a cost. The cost is your peace. The cost is your self-trust. The cost is the slow normalization of an imbalanced bond where you carry the emotional weight and call it love. Watch how this shows up. They want exclusivity without a conversation. They want intimacy without definition. They want loyalty without reassurance. They want your care but bristle when your care has needs attached to it. They want you close enough to be comforting, but not close enough to make claims. They may say they do not want pressure. They may say they are figuring things out. They may say they move slowly. And sometimes that is true. But moving slowly is not the same thing as keeping someone on hold while you take what feels good and avoid what feels real. This is why so many people in these dynamics feel emotionally robbed without being able to explain why. On paper, nothing terrible may have happened. There may be no cheating, no screaming, no obvious betrayal. But the depletion is real. Why? Because being half-loved is exhausting. Being almost chosen is exhausting. Being treated like an emotional home while never being given a real place in someone's life is exhausting. It forces you to live in a state of emotional readiness without emotional security. And there is another layer here that people often miss. Some avoidants genuinely believe that keeping things undefined is kinder. They think, if I do not promise too much, I am being honest. If I say I am confused, I am being transparent. If I leave things open-ended, I am not trapping anyone. But that logic falls apart when they continue accepting partner-level benefits. Because ambiguity is not harmless when it keeps one person deeply invested while protecting the other from accountability. Love is not just about how strongly someone feels in private. It is about what they are willing to consistently build in reality. That is the difference between emotion and integrity. Many people have emotion. Fewer people have the capacity to turn emotion into stable action. And if somebody repeatedly avoids that transition while still keeping you engaged, then your pain is not coming from being too needy. It is coming from trying to grow roots in a place that only offers temporary shelter. You have to be brave enough to ask the question that breaks the spell. Am I being loved, or am I being used to create the experience of love for someone who does not actually want to carry it with me? That question stings. It shakes everything, but it also saves people. Because the moment you stop romanticizing emotional unavailability, you start seeing the hidden bargain underneath it. They get freedom. You get uncertainty. They get comfort. You get confusion. They get access. You get anxiety. That is not a sacred connection. That is an imbalanced system. And if you have been living inside that system, hear this clearly. The problem is not that you asked for too much. The problem is that you accepted too little for too long, because the moments of closeness were emotionally intoxicating. But intensity without accountability will drain the life out of you. Chemistry without commitment will keep your heart spinning. And someone who wants the privileges of connection while rejecting the responsibility of connection is telling you, through behavior, exactly how much of your heart they are prepared to hold. Believe behavior, not fantasy, not potential, not emotionally charged exceptions, behavior. Why do they suddenly seem to care the most right when you are finally getting tired, pulling away, or walking out of the emotional prison they built around your hope? That is the fourth sign. They come back when they feel you detaching, not when they are truly ready to love you well. And this is where so many people get pulled back into the cycle just when they were about to break free. Because let's be real, nothing is more confusing than somebody who looked emotionally unavailable for weeks, maybe months, suddenly becoming warm, curious, affectionate, even urgent the second you start letting go. The texts become deeper, the energy changes, they ask how you are. They say they have been thinking about you. They revisit old memories. They show up emotionally in ways you begged for before. And your heart immediately wants to believe this means the breakthrough has happened. Finally, they feel the loss. Finally, they understand. Finally, the distance woke them up. Sometimes distance does wake something up in avoidant people. But what it wakes up is not always relational readiness. Very often, it wakes up attachment activation. That distinction will save you years. Avoidant people often feel safest when they control distance. They can pull back when intimacy feels overwhelming. They can reconnect when loneliness or longing appears. They can regulate the space according to what feels manageable for them. But when you stop chasing, stop reassuring, stop remaining endlessly available, something shifts. The system they were unconsciously relying on gets disrupted. Suddenly, they are no longer the one controlling access. Suddenly, your energy is not guaranteed. Suddenly, the emotional bridge they took for granted no longer feels stable. And that can trigger anxiety, curiosity, possessiveness, grief, even intense desire. But desire under threat is not the same thing as developed capacity. This is why no contact or emotional withdrawal can produce powerful reactions. It is not magic. It is not some trick that makes avoidance finally love. It is a disruption of pattern. When they feel you slipping away, their attachment system can come online more strongly because the loss becomes real. Distance feels different when they are the ones experiencing it instead of creating it. What they ignored while you were present can suddenly feel emotionally loud in your absence. And that is exactly why people misread the comeback. They think return equals change. They think longing equals readiness. They think renewed effort equals transformation. But if the core emotional structure has not changed, if the person still cannot tolerate intimacy without retreating, still cannot communicate consistently, still cannot hold your needs without feeling engulfed, still cannot take responsibility for the impact of their patterns, then the return is just another chapter in the same cycle. The form changes. The wound does not. This one hurts because the comeback feels personal. It feels like proof that you mattered. And to be fair, you probably did matter. But mattering is not the same as being loved in a healthy way. A person can feel the loss of your presence and still not have the skills, humility, and emotional regulation required to create a secure bond with you. They may come back because they miss how you made them feel. They may come back because your absence unsettles them. They may come back because they are not done accessing your energy. And if you mistake that pull for healed intention, you will open the same door to the same storm. Look closely at the pattern after they return. That is where the truth lives. Do they only come back with feelings, or do they come back with changed behavior? Do they bring clarity, or just intensity? Do they take ownership, or just express longing? Do they sustain effort when things calm down, or only show emotional urgency when they are afraid of losing you? Because many avoidants are capable of powerful emotional return during separation. The real test is not their reaction to loss. It is their behavior in closeness. That is the point most people miss. It is easy to be emotionally activated when access is threatened. It is much harder to stay emotionally present when intimacy becomes ordinary, steady, and real. Anyone can come back in a moment of panic, nostalgia, loneliness, or ego injury. Not everyone can remain open once the relationship starts asking for the daily courage of healthy love. And if you have lived through this, you know how destabilizing it is. Just when you begin rebuilding yourself, just when your nervous system starts settling, they reappear. Suddenly all the feelings come rushing back. The hope, the chemistry, the memories, the unresolved questions. It can feel like the universe is giving the story another chance, but often it is just the cycle defending itself. That cycle survives on one thing more than anything else: your willingness to confuse movement with change. A text is movement. A confession is movement. Missing you is movement. Reaching out is movement. But change is different. Change looks like consistency. Change looks like emotional accountability. Change looks like someone staying engaged after the fear shows up, not just before it. Change looks like them becoming capable of what they previously could not sustain. So if someone returns the moment they feel you leaving, do not just ask what they feel. Ask what they have built inside themselves that did not exist before. Ask what patterns they now understand. Ask what they do differently when intimacy starts triggering them. Ask whether the relationship becomes safer, clearer, steadier, and more mutual. Because if all they bring back is emotional heat, then they are not returning to love you better. They are returning to restore access. And that may be the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the comeback that makes your heart race is not the answer to your prayers. Sometimes it is the clearest sign that they only fully reach for you when they fear they can no longer reach you at all. Why does being used by an avoidant hurt in such a deep, disorienting way, like it reached past your heart and got into your identity? Because the injury is not just rejection, it is destabilization. Straight rejection hurts, but it is clean. You know where you stand. You can grieve what was lost. You can confront reality. What makes avoidant misuse so psychologically brutal is that it rarely gives you a clean emotional ending. Instead, it keeps feeding you enough connection to stay attached while denying you the consistency needed to feel secure. That combination creates a kind of emotional whiplash. You are not just heartbroken. You are mentally split. Part of you knows something is wrong. Another part keeps defending the bond because the bond contained moments that felt incredibly real. This is how people end up doubting themselves more than the person hurting them. You start asking if you are too sensitive, too demanding, too impatient, too emotional, too attached. You start shrinking your needs to fit their limitations. You start treating your hunger for stability like a flaw instead of a normal human longing. And because the connection was never fully secure, you begin trying to earn what should have been mutual from the start. That is where the wound gets deep. It is no longer just about them choosing distance. It becomes about you unconsciously learning to negotiate with your own worth. That is why so many people stay obsessed long after the relationship itself stopped giving them peace. The obsession is not always about love. Often it is about unfinished emotional business. Your mind keeps chasing closure because the pattern never settled into something clear. It was affection, then withdrawal, intimacy, then silence, need, then distance, hope, then confusion. So your nervous system does not know how to file the experience away. It keeps scanning, replaying, trying to solve the emotional puzzle, because the body believes that if it can just understand enough, maybe the pain will stop. But the pain does not stop through more analysis of them. It stops when you understand what happened inside you. An anxious avoidant dynamic can be especially devastating here. The more avoidant the other person becomes, the more activated the anxious side of you may feel. You pursue, they distance. You seek reassurance, they feel pressure. They retreat more. You work harder, they shut down further. And every round of that cycle deepens the bond, not because the relationship is healthy, but because the emotional stakes keep rising. Your body starts associating relief with their return. So when they reappear, you do not just feel happy. You feel chemically rewarded. That reward makes the whole thing harder to leave. This is why people can feel addicted to someone who gave them so little. It is not weakness, it is conditioning. Your nervous system got trained to wait for tiny signs of reconnection the way dry ground waits for rain. And once that happens, the relationship stops functioning like a normal bond. It starts functioning like an emotional slot machine. Unpredictable reward, constant hope, repeated loss, occasional payoff. That pattern can keep a person emotionally captive even when their rational mind sees the damage. There is also a quieter pain underneath all of this. Shame. Shame that you stayed. Shame that you tolerated less than you deserved. Shame that you explained away behavior that wounded you. Shame that you kept reading signs where there was no stable structure. But shame is not the truth. Shame is what happens when a good-hearted person wakes up after overextending themselves in a confusing bond. The truth is simpler. You were trying to make sense of mixed signals while loving from your deepest patterns. You were trying to turn inconsistency into meaning. You were trying to rescue possibility from emotional chaos. And a lot of that comes from old wounds. If you learned early that love had to be earned, managed, or carefully protected, then avoidant people can feel strangely familiar. Their distance activates your survival instinct. Their withdrawal makes you work. Their inconsistency feels painful, but recognizable. So the relationship becomes bigger than the present. It taps into older, emotional blueprints, older fears of abandonment, older beliefs that if you love hard enough, stay calm enough, become understanding enough, someone unreachable will finally choose you. That is why healing from this kind of bond is never just about getting over one person. It is about breaking a pattern that may have existed long before they arrived. And here is the trap people fall into. They become so focused on understanding avoidant psychology that they forget to examine the role their own unmet needs played in keeping them hooked. Understanding why avoidants pull away matters. Understanding why fearful avoidants return matters. Understanding deactivation, intimacy fear, and emotional shutdown matters. But if all of that knowledge only helps you excuse pain, then the knowledge is being used against your healing. The real breakthrough happens when you stop using psychology to romanticize what your body has been suffering through. When you stop saying they are just scared and start saying, I have been repeatedly harmed by this pattern. When you stop translating every cold behavior into hidden love. When you stop mistaking emotional complexity for emotional depth. That is when your nervous system begins to tell the truth. And the truth is not that you were foolish for loving. The truth is that your love got caught inside a dynamic where uncertainty was mistaken for intimacy. That happens. It happens to strong people, smart people, self-aware people, deep people. But once you see it, you have a choice. You can keep trying to decode the person who destabilized you. Or you can begin the harder, more liberating work of asking why your heart kept volunteering for confusion. That question is not meant to punish you. It is meant to free you. Because the moment you understand the wound beneath your attachment to them, their power starts collapsing. And what once felt like fate starts looking a lot more like a nervous system trap you are finally ready to outgrow. What if the greatest mistake was never loving them, but abandoning yourself while waiting for them to love you in a way they were never truly prepared to sustain? That is the hard truth that sets you free. Because at the end of all this analysis, all this pain, all this back and forth, all this trying to understand their patterns, their fears, their childhood wounds, their shutdowns, their return cycles, their mixed signals, their emotional contradictions, one question remains. What did this relationship train you to accept? That question matters more than whether they cared. It matters more than whether they were avoidant. It matters more than whether one day they will look back and realize what they lost. Because your life does not heal through their realization. Your life heals through yours. And your realization may be this. You kept trying to build a home with someone who only knew how to visit. You kept reading emotional intensity as commitment. You kept confusing being wanted in moments with being chosen in reality. You kept offering understanding where boundaries were needed. You kept giving the benefit of the doubt to behavior that kept damaging your peace. And that does not make you pathetic. It makes you human. It makes you hopeful. It makes you somebody who saw the pain in another person and believed love could reach it. But love cannot heal what accountability keeps protecting. That is the line. That is the awakening. Someone's trauma may explain their fear of intimacy. It may explain their deactivation. It may explain why they pull away, why they come back, why they send mixed signals, why they freeze when closeness becomes real. But explanation is not transformation. Insight is not repair. Woundedness is not a permission slip to keep breaking trust. And the moment you stop using their pain to invalidate your own, your whole world starts changing. Because now you are not asking, how do I get them to finally open? Now you are asking, why was I willing to keep shrinking in order to stay connected to someone emotionally unavailable? That question is powerful because it brings your attention back where it belongs, back to your standards, back to your patterns, back to your unresolved hunger, back to the parts of you that thought being endlessly understanding was the same as being deeply loving. It is not. Real love is not built on confusion. Real love does not force you to interpret silence as depth. Real love does not make you audition for consistency. Real love does not reward you only when you are detaching. Real love does not train your nervous system to expect closeness and loss in the same breath. Love can be challenging. Love can be vulnerable. Love can trigger old wounds. But healthy love still moves toward repair, clarity, and emotional responsibility. It does not ask you to live in permanent uncertainty while calling that maturity. And maybe that is the deepest lesson here. The pain was not pointless if it teaches you to recognize the difference between longing and alignment, between chemistry and safety, between being desired and being cherished, between being needed and being protected. Those are not small differences. Those differences determine the quality of your whole emotional life. So if this hurts, let it hurt honestly. Do not rush to make them the villain, but do not keep making yourself the exception either. You do not need to hate them to stop choosing the pattern. You do not need to deny the connection to admit the connection was harmful. You do not need to prove they never felt anything in order to finally accept that what they offered was not enough. That is maturity. That is self-respect. That is healing with your eyes open. And healing means more than walking away from them. It means walking back toward yourself, toward the part of you that knew something was off long before your mind was ready to admit it, toward the part of you that is tired of surviving on emotional breadcrumbs, toward the part of you that wants peace more than potential, toward the part of you that is finally ready to stop performing emotional labor for people who only show up when it serves them. That is where your power returns. Not in finally being chosen by the person who confused you, but in no longer needing confusion to feel chosen. Not in getting the perfect apology, but in becoming the kind of person who no longer waits for one in order to move on. Not in hearing them say, "You were right," but in knowing deep in your body that you do not need any more evidence than the impact their pattern had on your life. Because when you stop volunteering for emotional limbo, the whole cycle begins to starve. When you stop calling inconsistency a love story, your standards rise. When you stop trying to decode every mixed signal, your energy returns. When you stop asking why avoidants act this way and start asking why you are available for what hurts you, you move from helplessness to authority. And that shift changes everything. So if you needed a sign, here it is. Stop trying to earn steady love from unstable behavior. Stop trying to turn partial presence into full commitment. Stop trying to heal inside the very pattern that keeps reopening the wound. You do not need more patience for the wrong person. You need more honesty with yourself, more courage, more boundaries, more willingness to disappoint the fantasy in order to protect the truth. And the truth is simple. If someone can only love you in fragments, they do not get access to the parts of you that require wholeness. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom. That is growth. That is the moment your heartbreak stops being a prison and starts becoming a turning point.